be talking about soil health and pollinators, and even about some of the hedgerows that we'll be talking about today as well. So when we first started this site 3 years ago, we didn't have any sort of idea of like what we wanted to do in terms of maintaining the health of our soil, and also how we were going to bring beneficial insects to our site. So when we first started at this site in 2022, we sort of took off a first year as to just like planning and strategizing around some of the resources that we were hoping to sort of tap to get some of the information that we needed to further improve the site, both from its soil health component, but also how in the long term we were going to also source some of the things and practices that we were hoping to do at this site. One of the things that we did first year was we set this entire site, all 5 acres, into cover crop. We were fortunate enough that during that time when we first started our farm, we were sort of still in the times of COVID, and so there were a lot of resources looking for supporting small producers and being able to get both cover crop seed and compost. And so we first started with, of course, tilling and low reduced tilling around this entire site, and then not necessarily drilling, but using a belly grinder to essentially cover our cover crop here. And then we just dragged a harrow right behind our tractor to sort of cover the cover crop in itself. And that first year, during the entire fall into early spring, we cut it, and that was the initial beginning start of getting the cover crop in, and breaking up some of the hard pan here, which we know that at the very beginning of this site, we knew that this particular site right here leading into the big barn, there were vehicles being driven, as you can see where these crops were being at. And so we knew that there was a lot of compaction here. So knowing that the cover crop was going to break up most of that and aerate some of the locations that we were looking for. And we also had really high rains those first 2 years here in this part of California. So we know that it fared really well because of the cover crop opening up the soil, creating more pockets for water to sort of filtrate more into. And our cover crop on the first year, as you'll see through some of the photos, was about the same height as I am. So let's just say about 5'8", about 6 feet tall. And so that really helped set a great precedent for us to continue doing every year since then. Cover cropping beginning of late October all the way up until maybe like mid-March, end of March is when things would get cut. We'd use it as green mulch, let it dry, and then we would do compost. So in this past year, and even in the last few years, this site, mainly the 2.5 acres, were mainly being compost, and we were using about 24 tons of compost just in the 2.5 acres. This year, because we were able to use a state program called the Healthy Soils Program, one practice that we have in the past tried to do as much reduced tilling. So not trying to like chisel every year with some shanks, and really getting that deep subsoil, sort of massaging down below, but really riding off of the idea with the cover crop. As you'll see, we planted these hedgerows and some beautiful flowers to just kind of set where our beds will start, and how that will then go sort of down line into our crop production. These hedgerows were ones that were provided to us through a program called WSARE Society. They have a program for California here that you can subscribe to for several California natives hedgerows. And so we were given a bunch of hedgerows. There's several different varieties here. I don't really know all of their names, but we did plant several here, and then along on the outside of the property, you'll see that there's some like pink flags. Those pink flags normally have all ceanothus on the outside because they don't need as much sunlight. And then we have some on the outside of the property that's right on the road that we're on. There's a bunch of hedgerows on that outside as well. And that was mainly for noise and dust, and to also create a barrier for some of our pollinators and for some birds, as well as some of the beneficial insects that we'll have. And so those were all planted on the second year after we had initially gotten a report through CERSES at our NRCS office, which is the Natural Resource Conservation Service. So NRCS office, and was able to help us create a plan for how we were going to put some of these hedgerows in our site. And so that really helped us so that we can then apply for some funding to get the hedgerows, to get some of the irrigation for the hedgerows, and to also get some conservation practices from our NRCS office here in our specific county. And so these hedgerows mainly are sort of to break some of the wind, to bring a lot of our pollinators like butterflies, ladybugs, and other beneficial insects, and to also break some of the wind. That we get a lot of wind here, so it helps breaking up some of that to protect some of our crops that are in our field, and of course on the main road and our back of our farm. And on the back of our farm, the ceanothus was mainly also for erosion control, which was been helpful because we're sort of on a hill, and to hold some of the hill from continually eroding over time. Of course, these ceanothus are still growing. They're quite young. We've only planted them about a year ago. We've lost some to gophers, and of course to the high heats when they're not being irrigated during the summer. But we hope to replace them over time and continue to maintain our ceanothus and our hedgerows in place. But yeah, this is mainly what we've been doing. In terms of our soil health, as I'd mentioned before, we have been doing reduced till. One of the equipments from our past videos has been implements for our equipment, and the equipment that we've been using has been a spader. A spader is considered reduced tilling because we're not moving the soil from its soil structure. We're essentially just lifting it and giving it tilth, so that it will then eventually create kind of like a elevated amount of dirt that's been lifted up but not churned in your profile. And so that's been a huge tool that we continue to hope to keep using and improving the way that we can minimize using our disc to churn over our soil. Other than that, I'll show you in a minute some of the summer cover crops that we're using this year, which is buckwheat. We've got one that's already in full development, and several other smaller beds that are just currently starting to sprout, and we hope to just use that to cover our beds for the time being, so that they're not just sitting in the sun, and also minimizing weed. And that can be a way to suppress some of the field bindweed that I had mentioned in our weed management component. So those are some of the practices we've been doing here at our site: composting, cover cropping, using hedgerows, planting flowers for our pollinators, because we have a lot of crops that require pollination, and also for creating insectaries for combating some of our pest managements that we normally have, which is mainly our cucumber beetle. But we know that having a diverse variety of things that are sort of helping our soil and our our ecology here will allow us to sort of understand how to further integrate other things that might be useful in the long term. And so as we continue to learn what there's needed here, I think it will be more helpful for us to then integrate those as we begin to understand more here. So thank you.